For the past 2 years, Bitcoin has been forming the largest falling wedge in its history, and just recently we broke out above it, and today we are bouncing off of the resistance as new support. For a long time, people have been calling this a bull trap, but to me, it's starting to look a lot more like a bull trend. So let's talk about that in today's video. Bitcoin has now formed a higher low, but will we get the higher high? That is the question. As of right now, it seems as though Bitcoin is actually benefiting off of the recent golden cross. You bring up the 200 SMA, the 50-day SMA, and we have the golden cross. And the interesting thing about this is that the S&P 500 is also showing a golden cross. So Bitcoin and the S&P are very correlated, showing the same signals, lots of confluence between both the trends, both breaking above the macro downward sloping resistance, Bitcoin creating support on the macro downward sloping resistance. So this is all looking pretty good. And we were talking about this on the channel just a few days ago, a week ago or so, that this could be a bullish dip. Now, when I said that, a lot of people were saying, what the heck are you talking about? How can a dip be bullish? Well, this is what I mean. The creation of higher lows, a possible uptrend. This is what we call a bullish dip. And so far, if you bought that dip, you are up. That was a good dip buy scenario, at least for now. The macro resistance is now the new support, and the previous top is now the new support. This is very constructive price action, very good price action. Now, the next key thing is seeing a higher high. This dip proved that there is demand for Bitcoin above the $20,000 level. Since the beginning of the year, we kind of just went up in a straight line with almost no dips to be had. And Bitcoin falls down to 21,500, the exact level that it needed to hold, and it bounced. The market interpreted that as a good area of entry, and we're seeing a move up. So all that's going pretty well. Another thing that people have been discussing is if you go to Bitcoin on the weekly chart, we were just talking about the golden cross. Well, if you look at the weekly chart, we have a death cross taking place. Now, the thing that I was looking at, right? People talk about this. They were saying, this is bearish. Bitcoin's going to dump because we have a weekly death cross. But usually when I analyze Bitcoin, I know that I have to analyze the stock market as well and see if there's any similarity there. So the S&P has a golden cross. And if you go to the weekly chart, the S&P does not show a death cross, right? Looking at these two moving averages, the 50, the 200, the S&P is far away from a death cross. When have we seen a death cross for the S&P? Back in 2001 and 2008. Both of them were very, very bearish moments. But right now, the S&P does not show that. So to me, Bitcoin's weekly death cross is less significant because it doesn't have confluence with the S&P. So that's what I would be waiting for. If the S&P did end up dumping lower and we ended up getting that cross, well, then I would get bearish, right? But right now, the S&P is breaking the macro trend, maintaining prices above the macro downtrend line, the 1-year downtrend line. And it seems like it's holding its levels, right? It seems like maybe it actually wants to see continuation up. And this is something else we've discussed on this channel, was that there's a strong possibility that we may be seeing a sort of buy the rumor, sell the news type of scenario for the Fed pause. We've been talking about this for weeks, that the pause might be the rumor. And then when they pause, that's when we would sell off. A lot of people would be thrown off by that, which is why I think it's more likely, because most people think that the Fed pausing and reducing rates is just bullish. It's just bullish and we just go up. But history shows that that's not the case. Every pivot in history has resulted in a massive, massive market-wide dump. This is where the public has been misled by the news to think that a pivot is bullish. And I think it was intentional. I think they intentionally did it that way, but a pivot is not bullish. So I think that it's more likely that we see upside, that basically the market has this new normal of a pre-Fed pause uptrend. So we can run up to as high as like 4,500. We did a calculation on that a few videos ago, why that's the target. And if that is the case, Bitcoin could run as high as 30,000. Now, if we look at Bitcoin here, we can see that obviously we're getting higher lows on the daily, but the weekly chart is really the more interesting part. If I pull up the weekly RSI, something that we'll notice is that we use the 50 level for bullish and bearish trends as a major support and a major resistance. And right now you can see that here, we're actually bouncing off of what is that? That is the 50 level on the weekly RSI. Look at history here, guys. Every time we reject it, we're in a bearish trend. That was the 48K top right there. And when we hold it, we're in a bullish trend. Same thing with 2020. When we held that 50 level, that was a bullish trend. A major uptrend took place. If you go back in time, 2018 here, we had these tops. Those tops were met by a rejection off the 50 level on the weekly RSI. And guys, now we're doing the opposite. Look, we're using it as support. Now, of course, we need to hold this. We need to close a weekly to confirm that this is truly a support. But what I like about this for the bulls here is that Bitcoin is very far away from the overbought zone. We're using the 50 level as support, which is historically bullish. And technically, we have a lot of room to move up before we actually get overbought. And that's why I'm saying that if the S&P does continue this pre-Fed pause pump, Bitcoin may be able to actually hit some of our upper targets towards 28,800, maybe even as high as 30,000. Now, before we get too ahead of ourselves about all of this, just want to refresh your memory that if you go to the video that's featured on my channel, it's called Huge Pump, then Crash End of Year. Because we're going based off of my theory that the pause would be the rumor and people would sell, and we would be having an uptrend going to May. Markets would stabilize at a higher level for a couple months, and then a major sell-off takes place going into the second half of the year, and that's when things start to sort of settle up before the next halving. So we could see something along these lines where Bitcoin runs up, hits something as high as 28,800, maybe 30,000, settles up around that range, and then falls going into the second half of the year before preparing for the next halving. Usually, there's a lot of sideways action before the halving. The human brain usually just kind of thinks that the market's going to do something like this, or something like this, right? That's what the brain says, straight up or straight down, but it usually ends up being something more along the lines of this, right? And people get confused. But before every halving, we usually go sideways. So I just want to make sure you guys understand that. Yes, I am bullish for the next few months, but second half of the year, if everyone starts to get bullish when we come up to these levels, that's when I'm going to get a little bit more skeptical about this market. Just a few weeks ago, people were really skeptical of this pump. And now we're starting to see people get a little bit more bullish. And if everyone starts to get bullish on the next leg up, I will be very skeptical of that. Now, also something to notice about Bitcoin's volume on the daily is that we have not gotten a breakout in daily volume. We talked about this in the last video. Let's just go back in time to like 2018. If you look at this range here, we had a decline in volume. And the breakout really only took place right here, right? The breakout in volume took place when we broke resistance. And once we had a significant uptick in volume, that's when we start to really see the trend kick off. And so I'm looking for something similar now at the bottom of this market where the volume's tapering off. But once we get our first major volume signature above the downtrend line, that's when I think we could have a bullish trend kick off. And that's what's going to send us up to higher levels. How high are we going to go? It's really hard to say because it all depends on the stock market. It all depends on what the Fed says. When the Fed speaks, it's like they're just blowing a feather in the wind. And the market goes every which way. So if anybody out there, including myself, guesses it correctly, it's really a lot of luck. Nobody actually knows unless you're a Fed insider. The way that this is structured right now is pretty promising. I think we're probably going to see another higher high. And if we see a lower high, right, if we actually reject sooner and we come down, I would actually be looking for a test of 20K. But I still think that this would ultimately be bullish and the downside is limited. It's limited downside at this point, guys. We're getting a macro trend pivot. So I'm generally bullish still, and I think that the downside is limited. But that's mostly what I wanted to talk about today. Hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. If you guys want to see what altcoins I'm accumulating, you can join Patreon for that. And also sign up for my BitGet link below for up to $5,000 in trading bonuses. No KYC. If you're in the US, use a VPN. The fees are much lower on BitGet than most exchanges. So definitely take advantage of that. I'll see you all in the next one.